So, I believe that if you can't keep yourself hydrated, you can't do much of anything properly. That might sound like a harsh way to start. It might even sound reductive, especially when we're talking about complicated things like mental health, spirituality, meditation, and giving advice to other people. Obviously, a glass of water isn't going to solve someone's childhood or make them spiritually enlightened. I know that. I'm not suggesting that every emotional crisis is actually dehydration. I do think hydration sits so close to the foundation of human functioning that everything built on top of it deserves a little less admiration if the foundation is being ignored. Someone might be attempting a 40-minute meditation, but they've barely had anything to drink all day. Another person is giving profound advice about emotional regulation while dealing with the irritability, fatigue, headache, and mental fog that can accompany dehydration. Someone else is buying powders, supplements, nootropics, adaptogens, expensive magnesium, and some weird kind of special salt. Meanwhile, they don't consistently drink normal water. I think there's something spiritually revealing about that. People are attracted to complex solutions because complexity feels important. A basic requirement can seem almost insulting. Nobody wants to hear that the first step toward a clearer mind may be drinking water and getting some sleep. I think we would prefer an ancient breathing technique from a Himalayan cave, maybe one that costs $129, comes with a t-shirt or something. Hydration is too ordinary to impress us. I think that might be exactly the reason it belongs in spiritual conversation. Water is involved in nearly every system we depend on. It helps maintain blood volume, transports nutrients, supports temperature regulation, participates in digestion, and gives the kidneys what they need to remove waste. The brain is constantly monitoring the concentration of the blood. When the balance begins shifting, specialized systems detect the increase in osmolality. Thirst develops, and vasopressin tells the kidneys to conserve water. This is just basic human survival. The body takes hydration seriously, even if your personality doesn't. When you lose fluid, the issue is larger than just having a dry mouth. Blood volume may fall, the cardiovascular system has to work harder, especially during exercise or heat exposure. Temperature control becomes more difficult. The concentration of dissolved substances in the blood changes, which then affects the movement of water between cells and the surrounding fluid. This is just basic stuff. Like during prolonged exercise in the heat, dehydration has been shown to accelerate reductions in cerebral blood flow, even while the brain works to preserve its oxygen metabolism. Your brain does not simply turn off the moment you become mildly dehydrated. Our biology is much more resilient than that. You can still think, pray, argue online, send regrettable texts, and convince yourself you're functioning perfectly. I think what you should be wondering is what these tasks cost while you're dehydrated. Research on mild dehydration, much like most things, isn't perfectly uniform. Different studies use different methods, populations, temperatures, and levels of fluid restriction. Still, from what I've seen, controlled trials have repeatedly found changes in mood, fatigue, perceived task difficulty, concentration, memory, attention, headaches, and aspects of executive function. In some experiments, people were not dramatically dehydrated. The losses were modest enough that a person might simply describe the day as feeling off. And that phrase covers a lot of human suffering. I feel off. You're more impatient than usual, maybe. Concentration keeps slipping. Your head has developed a dull pressure. A basic task feels weirdly difficult. You can't settle into meditation, so you assume you've lost your spiritual discipline. Someone asks you a reasonable question, and it sounds like an attack. You end up trying to analyze your trauma, your energy, the moon, your hormones, maybe even the emotional tone of the room. There is also the possibility that you need water. I'm not saying your emotional experience is fake. Physiology and psychology aren't competing explanations here. The brain experiencing anxiety is still a physical brain. The person attempting to focus in prayer is still using attention systems shaped by sleep, nourishment, pain, illness, and hydration. Spiritual practice doesn't temporarily just remove you from your biology. We are living in an age where credentials exist alongside bro science, influencer marketing, supplement companies, and wellness trends that spread much faster than anyone can test them. A person can become extremely knowledgeable about an obscure nutrient pathway while remaining unable to manage their lunch. What I trust more is the pattern I've seen in clients and friends. When people begin meditation or deeper emotional work, basic care eventually becomes harder to ignore. They notice what their bodies have been trying to communicate. Some realize that they're living almost entirely on coffee, tea, energy drinks, and whatever moisture is in their daily sandwich. I mean, I've been there. We say we forget to drink, but by the time thirst becomes strong, we might already have a headache or a complete drop in energy. I think the weird part is how quickly people turn this into their personality. I'm just someone who doesn't drink water. I can't stand the taste. These sentences are said with the same resignation people use when discussing an inherited family curse. You are allowed to become someone who drinks water. It doesn't require a new identity, a hydration challenge, some kind of public announcement, or those giant water bottles with the motivational instructions or the the measurements. I've seen the bottles that speak to people throughout the day like a really involved life coach, like, good morning, keep going, you're almost there. By the bottom, I feel like I expect the bottle to start discussing my relationship with my dad, but I don't know. Maybe it works for some people. Use whatever helps, but the spiritual value is hidden in the ordinary act. You become thirsty and respond. You understand that the body has a requirement, so you make room for it before the requirement becomes a crisis. That's real stewardship. We often talk about the body as a vessel, although we become selective about what that means. Most people like the poetic version. The body carries the soul. It's a sacred temple. It contains consciousness and mystery. All of that sounds wonderful. But most vessels need maintenance. And once maintenance enters the conversation, spirituality becomes a lot less fancy. Now we have to discuss water, bathroom habits, sodium, sweating, sleep, constipation, headaches, and the color of urine. Suddenly, this sacred temple has a plumbing issue. I think that's healthy. A spirituality that can't tolerate the practical details of having a body easily turns into fantasy. People start treating physical signals as interruptions from a lower realm. Hunger becomes something to conquer. Tiredness is interpreted as resistance. Pain becomes blocked energy. Thirst is ignored because a person is busy trying to transcend human limitation. You are still a creature. So am I. That fact is not beneath spiritual life. In fact, that's the thing that creates the conditions for spiritual life. Consider meditation. Paying attention sounds simple until you attempt it. Even under ideal conditions, the mind wanders, the body becomes restless, and every unfinished conversation decides to come back at once. Dehydration can add more noise through headaches, fatigue, irritability, poorer concentration, and an increased sense that the task is difficult. Studies involving water restriction and later supplementation have found improvements in areas such as working memory, attention, processing speed, mood, and fatigue after participants drank water. Now, I know drinking water is not meditation, but it can make the person meditating less physically distracted. I think that's very important to note. We shouldn't make ridiculous promises. At least I shouldn't. Water doesn't cure depression, resolve trauma, produce wisdom, or guarantee a mystical experience. It just removes one unnecessary obstacle. A lot of health is like that. You may not be able to control whether your meditation feels profound, but you can avoid beginning it with a dry mouth, a headache, and blood that has spent the afternoon becoming increasingly concentrated because you had that 1 cup of coffee at 9 in the morning. The same principle applies to prayer. I don't think prayer is judged by how comfortable it feels. There are spiritually meaningful acts performed under exhaustion, thirst, illness, and other terrible conditions. Human beings have prayed in deserts, prisons, wars, and at the edge of death. I'm not questioning the sincerity or value of prayer offered through physical hardship. Here, I'm talking about the hardship we create through avoidable neglect and then interpret as spiritual depth. You stayed up scrolling until 3. You woke up late, rushed through the day, barely ate, drank no water, and arrived at whatever you were trying to arrive at, feeling irritated and unable to concentrate. There may be a spiritual problem in that experience, although the problem didn't necessarily begin when you started doing anything spiritual. So you might have to pray or meditate or study to notice. But it may have begun hours earlier when you repeatedly treated the body as though it had no connection to attention. Caring about hydration doesn't cheapen prayer. I think it acknowledges that attention is being offered through a living nervous system, something biological. Advice giving is another place where hydration matters more than we admit. People give advice while hungry, sleep-deprived, overheated, overstimulated, and dehydrated. They feel unusually irritable or mentally rigid, but they experience the emotion as certainty. That's really dangerous because a tired and thirsty person doesn't always feel tired and thirsty. Sometimes they just feel correct. Anyone who works with people should take that seriously. Before telling someone what their life means, check whether your own system is regulated enough to listen. That's what I do. There are days when the wisest intervention available is pausing the conversation, drinking water, eating something, and returning when your brain is no longer interpreting every sentence as an inconvenience. The advice might remain the same afterward, but the tone often changes. And I think tone is where much of our actual spiritual condition becomes visible. A dehydrated person may still know the right words, but the delivery can become impatient, hurried, or strangely absolute. Knowledge has remained intact, while the capacity to carry it well has declined. This is why hydration seems spiritual to me. The issue is not that water grants wisdom. This is about humility. Can I acknowledge that my most sophisticated thoughts are happening inside an organism with basic needs? Am I willing to check those needs before assuming every uncomfortable internal state contains some kind of message? Do I respect this vessel enough to maintain the conditions that allow me to be patient, attentive, and useful? I ask myself these questions all the time. It's how I keep myself in check. Of course I mess up, but this is how I come back. I think we like to imagine spiritual failure as a big dramatic thing. Pride, greed, corruption, maybe betrayal. Sometimes the smaller failures provide the environment where the larger ones grow. A person ignores thirst, becomes irritable, speaks carelessly, creates a huge conflict, then spends the evening analyzing the conflict as though it appeared from nowhere. The water would not have guaranteed kindness. I do think it may have made kindness easier to access. Exercise makes the hydration issue more obvious because the consequences arrive quickly. Fluid is lost through sweat and breathing. Heat production rises. The heart and circulation adjust. Performance can decline, especially during prolonged activity or hot conditions. Dehydration increases physiological strain, while extreme overhydration creates a different danger by diluting blood sodium. This is why drink as much water as possible is the dumbest advice I've ever heard. More is not automatically better. Water needs vary according to body size, climate, activity, pregnancy status, lactation, gender, and sweat rate. People with certain kidney, heart, liver, or endocrine conditions might have specific fluid or electrolyte requirements and need to follow medical guidance. The National Academy's general adequate intake figures are approximately 3.7 liters of total water per day for men and 2.7 liters for women, with total water including water from food and all beverages. Those figures describe averages for generally healthy adults rather than a commandment that every person must hit exactly, and needs can rise substantially with heat and activity. I think that distinction is constantly lost online. Someone hears 3.7 liters and assumes every man must carry a small aquarium with him. Another person hears that tea and food contain water and decides that 2 coffees and the moisture inside a burrito are probably enough. Common sense has definitely left the building. Most healthy people do not need to obsessively calculate every milliliter. Thirst, regular access to fluids, meals, climate, and urine color can offer practical clues. Although no single home measure is perfect, darker urine and infrequent urination can suggest that more fluid is needed, while completely clear urine all day may indicate that someone is drinking beyond thirst. Supplements and electrolyte drinks have a place, particularly with heavy sweating, prolonged exercise, vomiting, diarrhea, or specific medical needs. They should not become another excuse to avoid ordinary water and a normal diet. As you might know, I recently moved from Arizona to Pakistan, and in both these places, summer has a way of making hydration much less philosophical. You can leave the house believing you're a spiritual being on a meaningful journey, and return 40 minutes later as a damp, irritable mammal who would betray his principles in a second for an AC. Heat exposes the truth very quickly. The body is using fluid to regulate temperature. You're sweating more than you notice. Air conditioning can also dull awareness of how much fluid you're losing across the day. Tea and coffee remain part of fluid intake, despite the exaggerated claim that every caffeinated drink dehydrates you completely, but relying on them alone can still create practical problems. Strong caffeine use can affect sleep, anxiety, and bathroom frequency, especially in people who are sensitive. If you're fasting, the conversation becomes a lot more serious because fluid intake is limited, and this is specifically for anyone fasting religiously. The conversation becomes much more serious because fluid intake is limited too. The answer isn't really to treat dehydration as proof of greater faith. People can plan their evening and morning fluids, spread intake rather than attempting to swallow the entire daily requirement at once, include nourishing meals, and pay attention to heat exposure. I think people with medical conditions should follow qualified religious and medical guidance rather than attempting to win some kind of imaginary suffering competition. I think, from what I understand, spirituality and discipline requires judgment. There's no wisdom in creating avoidable harm and calling the harm devotion. Hydration also reveals how poorly many of us understand consistency. People will become interested in water for 3 days and drink enormous quantities. They buy the bottle, they add the cucumber, they research salt, they visit the bathroom 19 times and decide hydration is not compatible with their day job. Then they stop. A better approach is boring enough to work. Drink after waking. Have fluids with meals. Keep water within reach while working. Drink before exercise and replace what you lose afterward. Increase attention during hot weather. Use a bottle that is convenient rather than impressive. I hate that I have to say that. Pair drinking with activities you already perform instead of relying on spontaneous motivation. I think a good goal is to make hydration part of your daily environment. When I spoke about doing 1 push-up a day, the deeper value was consistency, restraint, and faith in small actions. Hydration belongs to the same family of practice. You don't need to become excited about it. Your body doesn't require your enthusiasm. It just needs water. That sentence applies to many forms of care. The body rarely asks whether the action is aesthetically pleasing. It responds to repetition, usually. There is also a psychological benefit in becoming responsive to basic needs. Many people have spent years ignoring themselves until discomfort becomes unbearable. They wait until they are desperately thirsty, painfully hungry, completely exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, or physically injured. Their only 2 states are neglect and emergency. Regular hydration teaches a quieter relationship with need. You notice before crisis. You respond without drama. Over time, the body learns that it does not always have to scream. That idea is very relevant in trauma work and meditation because interoception, the ability to notice internal signals, can become confused. Some people barely register thirst. Others feel bodily sensations intensely but interpret them catastrophically. Rebuilding a practical relationship with those signals can be grounding. The task at hand is not to obey every sensation blindly. It's just to become curious enough to distinguish information from actual alarm. A headache may need medical attention. It may be stress, medication, phenol withdrawal, or dehydration. Water is one reasonable first check, provided there are no fluid restrictions or alarming symptoms. The spiritual mistake would be assuming the headache is automatically psychic pressure from some kind of recent gnosis or spiritual attack even. Sometimes your head hurts because you've treated water like an optional hobby. I know this subject risks becoming a very long version of someone's mother saying, "Go drink water." But mothers are frequently correct in ways that damage the ego. I know mine is. What makes hydration spiritually important is its position in the hierarchy. It is foundational without being glamorous. The practice is impressed that your cells are adequately supplied with fluid. You can't build an identity around having normal plasma osmolality, although I'm sure an influencer will eventually try. The action remains useful even when it gets no attention, and that's so rare now. Modern wellness encourages people to perform care. You have to take a picture of the bottle. The morning routine has to become content. The supplement stack needs an affiliate link. Even meditation can turn into evidence that someone is more conscious than everyone else. I think water just ignores that drama. You drink it, the body uses it, and life continues. This is close to how many spiritual practices actually work. Their importance comes through repetition, integration, and what they make possible elsewhere. The moment of drinking water is not profound. The improved ability to listen patiently to someone may be. The water didn't make the compassion, but it helped maintain the brain and the body through which that compassion had to travel. I think this is also why people resist foundational advice. It removes excuses while offering no grand identity. If you want to meditate, begin by making the body reasonably ready to sit. If you want to exercise, arrive with enough fluid to regulate temperature and circulation. If you're going to counsel people, check whether your irritability is wisdom or an unmet physical need. Prayer deserves attention, and attention is easier to offer when you haven't spent the entire day ignoring your physiology. These are not guarantees of spiritual quality. A well-hydrated person can still be vain, foolish, and cruel. Hydration just creates capacity. Your character then determines how you use that capacity. I guess that might be the simplest way to express the idea. Water gives you no virtue by itself, but it helps you function well enough to practice virtue deliberately. The statement, if you can't stay hydrated, you can't do anything, is technically too absolute. People accomplish extraordinary things while dehydrated. Human beings survive conditions they should never have been placed in. But the spiritual truth under the harsh sentence still holds. Before reaching upward toward complex practices, look downward at the conditions supporting you. I won't say as above, so below, but as above, so below. Your insight is traveling through a brain that needs stable fluid balance. Your patience is expressed by a nervous system affected by fatigue, temperature, circulation, and concentration. Your prayer is occurring inside a body rather than outside it. Your fitness depends on blood volume, sweating, electrolyte balance, and the ability to regulate heat. The basics do not replace the higher work, but they do show whether you respect it or not. I would feel strange watching someone prepare for an advanced meditation retreat while refusing to drink water throughout the day. I would feel equally strange receiving spiritual instruction from someone who treats every physical need as an inconvenience. There's a lack of integration there. The person wants access to the heights without accepting responsibility for the ground. Real spirituality, as scary as that is to say, should make us more honest about being human. We need water. That need isn't making you less spiritual, it's just showing your dependence, and that's okay. You did not invent the thirst mechanism. You do not consciously command the kidneys to adjust water retention. You're living inside an intelligent system that keeps correcting for your decisions. And most of the time it does this without receiving any gratitude from us. Maybe hydration can become a small acknowledgement of that gift. You don't even need a ceremony. Just drink enough for your circumstances. Notice how your mind and mood feel when you've gone too long without it. Avoid turning hydration into another obsession. Try to respect medical limits and pay more attention during heat, illness, travel, and fasting. Give the body what it needs before demanding that it perform something impressive. Then meditate, then pray, then exercise and offer advice. You may find that the higher practice becomes a little less dramatic and a little more sincere because the person attempting it is finally present. This has been Idiot Mystic. Please drink some water before deciding what the universe is trying to tell you. And do come say hi on the Discord or comments or wherever you want to say hi. Bye.